My name is Martha Van Berkel, and I'm the CEO at Schema App, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you today to our webinar on Schema Markup for the health industry. So welcome. I'm also joined today by Simon Yohe from AdventHealth. Welcome, Simon.
Hi, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely jazzed. So we have a ton to cover today. So we're going to start with a little bit about our introductions, and then we're going to kind of launch right into what is schema markup, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Talk about the different content types you can optimize, regardless of the type of company that you're at. Talk a little bit about rich results, and then we're going to really narrow in on health. And this is where we're going to share just a ton of stories, Simon. I'm just like over the moon excited for you to share some of the results, the story about the rebranding of AdventHealth, how you measure success, how it's impacted other parts of your business. And then we'll wrap up with just another bit of market news, things that have been going on around the areas of structured data and schema markup. And then we'll finish off with open Q&A. So again, if you have questions, I'm joined today by Mark Van Berkel and Jeffrey Burns. Mark's my co-founder, and Jeff is one of our customer success managers, and they'll be sort of able to answer those questions for you and just make sure that you're learning throughout this entire process. So let's go ahead and dive in. And I always like to start introductions with a knowledge graph, sort of explaining sort of like who each of us are. And so, as I said, my name is Martha Van Berkel, and I'm one of the founders of the app. I spent 14 years at Cisco prior to becoming an entrepreneur. And so I've experienced working in large, complicated organizations with lots of different types of content. I also have a technical background. So I have a degree in mathematics and engineering and also studied at MIT. I am Canadian, so if I say thank you, apologize, or A during my presentation, it comes to me honestly. And then I like to talk about how I used to own this really awesome 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. And this red car was a ton of fun to drive. And my actual car starred in the movie Losing Chase. And Losing Chase was directed by Kevin Bacon. And Kevin Bacon used to drive my car on weekends, which means that I'm actually like 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon. And the reason I share this like interesting tidbit about myself is that you now know that you're 3 degrees from Kevin Bacon because you were able to see my knowledge graph and connect those dots on how I'm connected to Kevin Bacon. And that's actually what schema markup or structured data does, is it allows Google to connect those dots to be able to answer questions that people may not know or think of asking. So Simon, I'm going to hand it over to you and just ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your knowledge graph.
Yeah, and Martha kindly put this together, but it was fun to see this and see what she was able to scrape online. But I'm here at AdventHealth and Director of Web Strategy. I've been here for about 2.5 years, and I was actually brought on board as part of our initiative and efforts to rebrand all of our hospitals across 9 different states into a singular brand, and we'll go into further details on that. Prior to that, I was in charge of the digital marketing efforts at Orlando Health. It was a 9-hospital system in Orlando as well. And through that as well, unfortunately, I am a Miami Dolphin fan. It's been a rough go for us for a long time, but at least University of Florida there has got me going with 2 bowl games in a row. So it's pretty neat that she was able to put this together. I don't have Kevin Bacon connect to me, but I should put that on there now. I have that for you, Martha.
And you recently spoke at the 21st Annual Healthcare Marketing
Yes.
and Physicians Summit. Excellent. Also, Jeff will be joining us. Jeff is one of our customer success managers. He also is sorry that he's a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, big hockey fan. And he comes with a philosophy background, which is actually one of the best degrees to do schema markup with, because you have to ask the question of like, what is this thing? So Jeff will be chiming in throughout the presentation with some pieces around like the implementation and nuances around the rebrand. So let's start at the very beginning, which is, what is schema.org and what is schema markup? And I like to do this just so that everyone joining, whether this is like your first webinar learning about this type of SEO strategy, or it's something that you've heard before, that we all are on the same page. And so schema.org is a vocabulary that was created way back in 2011 by Google, Yahoo, and Bing. And they created it in order to really sort of allow their machines to better understand content on the web. And so they really defined this to make their machines' job easier. And what they defined is this actual vocabulary. So just like English and French, it's a vocabulary for machines. And they've defined 800 different definitions. It's like 842. And with each of those, there's different ways that you can describe things. And I'll give you some examples so we can see what that is. And so schema markup, or what's also termed by Google often as structured data, is the act of applying the schema.org vocabulary in the form of code to all of your digital content. And so I always think of it as like translating your website into the language of search engines. But schema.org is the name of that vocabulary, and then schema markup and structured data is really the act of doing it. Now I'm going to get into some of the code here, but don't worry, we're going to come back high level. So we're not going to stay this technical, but schema markup is code that Google understands. And so here's an example of a page, with in gray, a block of schema markup, which is translating to say, oh, it's a job posting about a customer success manager. And the code really comes in 3 different supported formats. So you may have heard of JSON LD, you may have heard of microdata and RDFA, and I'll describe what those things are. But most importantly to take away from this is that the code type of JSON LD is what Google prefers. And it really makes sense that they do this because it's actually like more easily embedded in a site, and it's in a big chunk of data, which I'll show now. So JSON LD, if you're looking at the code, and again, it's the only time I'm going to ask you to look at code today, is that it's in a block. And so you can imagine if Google is actually going through and trying to translate a site, it's much easier if it's all in like one big block. It's like, oh, this is the section I need to translate into our language. And so JSON LD is sort of when it all is sort of in one big group. Microdata and RDFA, though, is more like tagged within the HTML. So it spreads sort of across the page. And you can imagine from a maintenance perspective, this is a lot more fragile and hard to manage. Make sense? Now, I'll use the word schema markup primarily, but it also structured data is a term used within the industry. Now, I always get asked, like, Martha, why do you call it schema markup? Well, schema markup's about like understanding and bringing context to content, and structured data can be like something structured in a table, so it's not very specific. So I find it a little humorous that Google uses something that's less specific, but we'll use the words primarily schema markup. They mean exactly the same thing in the SEO space. Now, schema markup is only just like one part of your overall strategy. I often get asked, is it a silver bullet? It's one thing that you should do, like in addition to, page speed, crawlability, having like really good structure on the website, etc. Now, what was really interesting this past May at Google I/O, they presented and said for the first time what their motivation, so what Google's motivation for doing structured data is. And what they said is that they want to have an open global standard that explains, exactly what one thing is that you can optimize with once and then reuse and be found across like any surface. And when they talk about surfaces, they mean tablets, they mean cars, watches, voice. And so really what they're saying is like add schema markup and you'll basically not just get rich results, show up in search, but also Google will make sure you're showing up across all these different surfaces. And so it's the first time they've talked about their motivation, and it's really exciting because they're really talking about like optimizing for all different machines and all different channels. Now, Google Bert is something that came out this past fall, which like harnessed a lot of attention. And Bert is really understanding within a phrase. So for example, like I'm going to the bank, and it's going to look to see if I'm talking about money or if I'm talking about like, weeds or fish, to understand if I'm going to a bank that's financial or a bank that's more associated with a river. And so Bert really helps understanding the context of the language, whereas schema markup is helping understanding of the elements of the page. So the two of them really work together in order to help drive understanding. And all of us are business people, and so a lot of this comes down to like, well, what are the business results? And Simon, I'll look forward to you sharing a bunch of the business results specific to AdventHealth. But across our enterprise clients, we've seen structured data help with everything throughout the customer journey. At the front end of the funnel with impressions, click and click-through rate, all the way through the actual interactions and spending more time on page, and then resulting in higher revenue or sort of in that higher engagement, however you measure success. And so we've really seen structured data sort of help people across the board, and not only when they just get rich results. but understanding really increases findability. So let's spend just a couple minutes. We're going to get into a little bit about rich results, and then we're going to jump into stuff about health specifically. So for those that aren't familiar, rich results are when we turn a rich result that doesn't have just has lines within the search result to where there's images. So things that sort of grab our attention, that pull us in. And so it really brings your content to life. And Google has a long list of these features. And if you stay on top of these, you'll know that these have been changing regularly. And what I thought I'd highlight are some of those Google features that I think apply across most industries, but specifically in health as well. So the first is health articles and blog posting. And so you can see that there's like a different experience and rich results that show up when you optimize with Schema Markup for those articles to show up both on mobile as well as desktop. Videos is another great one. So if you're using videos, whether to introduce maybe some of your physicians or staff, or in order to talk about your services or about the work that you do in the community, videos have a very different experience. You can see how sort of broad this is taking over in the mobile experience, as well as results showing up directly in desktop. FAQ is one of my favorites. Simon, this is your site showing like amazing FAQ results for the FAQ page that we did on the executive health program. Here again, sort of, it's sort of dominating the entire result in mobile, as well as sort of in desktop. I had sort of view more, but you can see the sort of the number of content that's showing up directly there.
And that was only we just started tapping the waters into that. So we're really excited about that. So I think we'll talk a little bit more.
Yeah, about the actual results. Yeah. Recipes as well. So a lot of health-oriented organizations, this is Heart Health Recipes, are doing recipes like that go along with the recommendations or other information you're providing. Again, great results on mobile as well as desktop. And then ratings is another one we're going to dig into. Here's an example of a ratings of a physician, and we'll talk about some changes in ratings as well. But as I mentioned, like ratings, videos, FAQs, these are things that apply across any businesses. So, there's a starting list of the type of content to think about that you can optimize and use structured data in order to get results. So let's now zero in on health, right? We're all here to sort of learn about schema markup in the health industry. And I thought an interesting stat I came across, and Simon, I don't know if you've seen this, but Google reported that 7% of its daily searches are health related, and it receives about 1 billion health questions every day, or 70,000 health related searches every minute. Can you believe this?
It's great for business.
It's great, yeah, great for business, right? It's unbelievable. So huge opportunity around sort of health, and Google not only is saying that they're getting a ton of volume, but they must be getting so much volume that they actually identified a lead for an area called Google Health. So David Feinberg was reported that after he opened it, he's just recently in November started talking about how they think Google is going to start playing in this space. And one area they talked about was leveraging Google's search capabilities to help doctors more easily find information, sort of reducing their amount of time that they're searching for information. And then they also talked about improving the health related searches on Google. So you can imagine the health related searches apply directly to what we're talking about today, which is how do we help your content or your information get found so that you can sort of, be the answer to some of those queries. The other piece that came out, and it's been going on since about July 2018, but as we see algorithm changes like the ones we saw this week, where they're starting to talk about each, so expertise, authority, and trust, and trying to gauge not just the expertise and authority of the content, but also in the author. And so I was, the search quality evaluator guidelines are an actual detailed resource on what they look like for quality results and sort of what the evaluators look like there. But just a key piece, and another key takeaway, I was trying to make sure I had lots of actionable things in the presentation is, using structured data to define your data, allows them to really understand the context of it, to attribute to authority, and then also answering really specific questions with your articles and blogs. And Simon will talk a little bit about the opportunities we identified for AdventHealth. And then FAQ and how-to schema markup. And FAQ and how-to were announced this past spring. FAQ is a great one because it's sort of matching up question and answers together. QA page, which is a different type of schema markup, is more for community type groups or forums. So if people are answering lots of different questions. So FAQ though is a great way for you to do it. So you can add this to your list of additional content that you should optimize, as well as how-to. And how-to is a little harder. It's looking more for step-by-step step-wise, but perhaps if you create content on, how to measure your levels of insulin or other sort of, step-by-step procedures, this may be a great way to sort of optimize your content to then get these additional rich results. And note, like on a lot of these, especially how to, they're looking for images to be identified with each of these steps. So if that's not something that you can do today, it's something where the structured data can inform improvements to your content. And then the other thing that happened this past November is that schema.org, so the vocabulary we talked about at the beginning, posted some new, very healthcare specific changes. And this was interesting because they haven't really done a lot in healthcare since about 2016. And they added into pending. So this means that like they're being evaluated sort of for a future release, but health topic content. So will be about aspects of a health topic. So this is kind of interesting when we think about, we want to talk about specific health topics and what are the things related to that topic. And then also a property associated to the health topic, which is like indicating specific things that specifically addressed about that health topic. So you can see that, health topic, this announcement sort of, with the announcement of Google Health coming up, helps me believe that Google will continue to strive to create a new experience around Google Health, and there's lots of opportunity for you to be the authority and to help inform that. Interesting and fun, right, Simon?
Oh yeah, I mean it is definitely, and it's very interesting because like when we talk about our physician directory and our provider, this has actually brought some insight and some arguments back to some of the data that we may want to display on the page so that we can mark up as it relates to the physician profile. So
totally.
For many within the healthcare system, they'll use the treatments, procedures, the conditions as part of the keywords that might be used when someone's searching for a physician, but you don't necessarily want to show that in there. So we're looking to come up with creative ways to be able to get that information displayed, maybe not necessarily prominently on the page, but in a place on the page that we can then go in with the Schema Markup tool to be able to connect and tag that so we can associate that to those providers. So it's been something that I can use to help push to get some more changes done because of the benefits that we can see from it.
That's awesome. I love like how Schema Markup can like inform the content strategy, and I keep those examples coming. So now we're going to dive in one step deeper into Schema.org for health and life sciences. So health and life sciences is the actual name of the extension. So think of this as sort of like a specific vocabulary that was added to Schema.org specifically for the medical space. And you can see here it includes everything from like medical condition, medical therapy, signs and symptoms, cause, tests, exercise plans, devices, drugs. It's very, very broad. And you can learn more about it at that link there, health.lifesci.schema.org. But I'm going to attempt to share a little bit about it and sort of ways that you can use it. And so when they were creating this, they talked about sort of defining specific types of medical entities. So think of medical entities as like people, places, and things in the medical space. And they sort of were looking everything from signs, symptoms, conditions, and causes, diets, drugs, guidelines. And what's interesting in some of the properties is, they really worked not just like from a blank slate, but like looking at, the fact that some medical procedures, have actual codes and things related to them. And so that's all built in. And so, some of the most popular types or sort of like relevant types are listed here in, a hospital or medical clinic, a procedure, medical therapy or indication, medical study, symptom, test, and condition. And so what I thought we'd do today is actually like look at a query. And then I'm going to explain like how if you mark up those different things, how that informs that query. And so what I thought we'd do is we look for a neurologist doctor or a neurology doctor in Toronto. So someone to help with the brain. I sometimes get foggy brain as a result of my Lyme disease. And so, this might be a type of search that I'm looking for. And if we actually break down what's in the search, it's looking for a medical condition, specifically a physician, and a specific area. So let's look at like what you would optimize on the site to help sort of inform this type of query. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just like start by like grounding it. So we're going to assume that we're some type of medical organization like AdventHealth that Simon's with, and it's a hospital that's like owned by a parent organization. And the hospital, as you go to describe it, so these are the type of properties that you can use to describe a hospital. And so things like an address, image, and name and URL. So here you're, describing like the physical place, the rating, the departments, the opening hours, the reviews, and telephone. But in the other fields, there's lots of different things that you can cover. So area serves ones I'm going to talk about, like what is the area that hospital or that medical clinic serves, who are some of the employees, where's the founding date, is there a latitude and longitude? Does it have a specific map on the page? Is it a member of another association? Same as is a really great property where you can match it to other things that are describing that same entity. So if the hospital has a Google My Business page, or let's say it has a Wikipedia page because it's really, famous hospital, you might use same as. So these are all the different types of what we call properties in schema.org to describe that hospital. And so these would be the ways that you sort of describe like what's on that page and define here. And if let's say there's something that you wanted to call it, so maybe you wanted to talk specifically about like who the founder of the hospital was, because that was really important, maybe tied to the name, that might be content you want to put on the page so that you can then optimize that specific property. And so the hospital then has these properties. So I've chosen medical specialty, contact point, and area served. And area served maps to a place. So in my query, the query was looking for Toronto. So this is where, like, if the hospital covered Toronto, that's where it would show up here. A contact point would be that contact information. So it might link to my contact page with that contact information. And the medical specialties that it offers, I would add neurologic. And so I've already now, by like this hospital defining that it's in Toronto and that it has medical specialties around neurologic, I've actually already satisfied two of the things in the query. And so within the medical specialty, there's also like tons of things that you can describe, but more importantly, it's looking for you to use one of these, they call them enumeration members, but think of these as like a defined list. And so you can go ahead and pick one of those things out of the defined list, and these are defined within schema.org. Now, I want to get to physician, right? So if that hospital also had a doctor and that there was a page on the website that had the doctor, I could then say, oh, well, the physician has a medical specialty. And ideally, I'd point to like a page that also has the medical specialty around neurologic. And now all of a sudden, I've satisfied those three things. Google knows that there's a physician that practices in neurology that's in Toronto associated to this hospital and therefore can answer my query. And so what I've just shown you is how Schema Markup is used to optimize like different types of pages that talk about these different things and connect them in the way that Google can then answer our questions. And so, all of these things, like a physician also has lots of different names. And I think this is what you're just talking about, Simon, where, there's some things that we identified within physician that like, you're like, oh, we don't include, I always like talking about like, where they're an alumni of, right? So that you can kind of tie it back to their medical school. And, like if that's listed there, how do we define that? Or if, let's say there's ratings available. So how do we make sure that we tie that piece in? And so these properties are really there to not just, guide you in what you can optimize on the page, but will also allow you to backwards engineer and say, well, what could I describe? Because these properties were what were come up by Google, Yahoo, and Bing when they were trying to define these different things. So I'll just touch on a couple more examples, and then Simon, we're going to jump right in to physicians. So medical procedure is another one. It can have, again, tied to specialties. You can see how these things can all start getting tied together. Again, has like different properties that you can use in order to describe it. You also can connect, medical condition to the symptoms to a test. So if you're talking about a specific test, you can kind of tie that back to pages that talk about that condition or about that symptom. And again, all of them have like lots of detailed things. So I want to now double click a little bit on review rich results. So review rich results are when there's a rating. And, Jeff, I see you're on here, and Simon, let me talk about like the change that happened. I'm going to let the two of you then sort of delve into the story. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
So what happened in September was that Google made an announcement that they were going to reduce or like limit the number of schema types that could actually trigger a rich result for ratings. So again, where there's a star rating. And what they did is they reduced it significantly. We were extremely sad to see blog posting articles disappear and services, because blog posting articles, tons of people found our Schema Markup articles and sort of clicked on us because we had this amazing rating rich result. And then they also pulled it back on local business and organizations ratings where it was created by that organization. And their intent here was to make it so that people weren't kind of spoofing or lying about their ratings, like making up their own ratings and then getting a rating rich result. And so, what they did on a lot of these was like they all just disappeared. Now, physicians also disappeared for a bit because physicians are actually a subclass of a local business. And at this point, Jeff, I might just ask you to chime in. So Jeff, again, is one of our customer success managers here at Schema App. Jeff, can you just talk about it was sort of like an interesting period kind of on and off where the physician ratings were coming and going. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was challenging because Google's update to their documentation didn't make it exactly clear in this case, if the reviews and the ratings would be self-serving. Their example or their wording in the documentation was that you can't have a review about entity A on entity A's website. And the physicians were set up in a way where it was kind of a gray area. So what happened was, I think it was like October 15th or 16th, they announced the change finally. They removed a whole whack of star rich results and review and rating rich results for everybody. And initially we saw physician ratings drop. They went away. And so we had to go and double check and make a couple of subtle changes that made the physician rich results, the physician schema markup eligible under the new rules. And then I think 2 or 3 days later, Google updated their change and said, okay, these edge cases are allowed. And that's when we saw the reviews come back on and then monitor it closely because of how powerful they are.
And with physicians, Simon, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's quite a lot of regulation around how you can request ratings and so forth.
Right. And so we're using Press Ganey, and so we're ingesting the ratings that are being done by Press Ganey and then tabulating those within to the actual providers. And we do a little bit of a scrub as it results to making sure that there are no foul language or there are no HIPAA violations in regards to any kind of PHI information that might be present within there. But yeah, it's funny because there had been a lot of back and forth about whether or not to show ratings, and for many providers, they were very scared. And we definitely were trying to emphasize how with the rich snippets that we were actually going to be able to provide them additional exposure within there. And in fact, other sites, you have Vitals, you have Yelp, you have other sites that are already doing physician ratings, but because it's so limited, they may only have 4 or 5 ratings. This really allows you to get that full pull of all of the patients that are coming in and providing a much better result set. We have actually seen significant increases in how our physicians are being found. The beauty thing too about the schema markup, as you put it, was it didn't just, if you go back 2 slides, it didn't just impact the result set within the search. They actually also took those physician ratings and they compiled them within the reviews from the web. So
yeah, right here on the right. And this is brilliant.
And so with that, it was fantastic because it actually pulled one more. It took one of the other ratings off and put AdventHealth on there for us, so it provided some additional exposure. And we saw some significant increases just within the first 3 or 4 weeks of having the rich snippet there.
Yeah,
and everyone got excited. It went away, but then it came back. We happen to have a separate site currently right now for our medical group that has the same physicians, and literally if the main AdventHealth site didn't have that physician number 1 in search and the medical group was, it replaced all of them, and almost all of them jumped up to that top spot. So it was something that's fantastic. There are some things that are really interesting too, that I learned about ratings is it's not just simply that star and that ratings. There was actually a couple of things that we had to do as well. We weren't allowed to show the patient's name in regards to who provided that review from a privacy perspective. So we actually was able to work with the developers like that. So we actually tied something where I think it says AdventHealth verified patient as the username. So I think as you're going through and looking at this, I think one of the other things that was a nice lesson learned is that when you do the ratings, you do the snippets for this, you need to make sure you follow all of the required fields that follow within Google, because we did see some other sites lose their ratings, and they did not come back with that. And I wonder if it's because some of those required fields weren't there that you guys had noticed.
And one thing I'll just touch on here is, so on the right-hand side, this is like the Google My Business piece, right? Remember I mentioned that like same as property. So like you can tie in like Christopher Buelvis from AdventHealth is the same as like this listing on Google My Business. And then like Christopher's page on AdventHealth is like where those reviews are coming from. And if you click on that link there, it actually takes you directly to his page on AdventHealth. So we were trying to talk about like connecting the dots to like almost like make your own knowledge graph. Like this is like great evidence of Google using that, which I love. And so Simon, you had some of the the results of sort of like physician specific rating. You want to speak a little bit about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, and we looked at I have some stats like over like a 15-week period prior to the ratings and 15 weeks after the ratings. We saw physician bio clicks increase 90%. We had roughly about 150,000 clicks, and it actually jumped to about 285,000. And this is a different chart than what's there, but I had some further numbers as well to get. And we saw impressions increased 40%. The click-through rate, and that's the other thing that you also have to factor in is not just are they being exposed and are they seen, but we're actually seeing more and more people click on that. So we saw a 38% increase in the click-through rate of those search results as well. So saw a vast amount of impressions, and because of the rich snippet and driving it to the top seed, we actually saw it to improve to about 38%.
That's unbelievable. So Simon, let's talk a little bit about like your story, and I want you to start like at the rebrand when we first started talking, when it was AdventHealth system and you're moving to AdventHealth. Can you talk to us about that story? Because it's not just about Schema Markup for health in your case, because you also went through this like giant name change. So can you tell us a story, and then we'll also have Jeff kind of give some details on how you can use schema.org to do that.
So for anyone that might be looking at doing a rebrand or totally reorganizing their company or their services, definitely recommend this. So for us, I came into this situation. We are in 9 states, like I said earlier, about 50 hospitals. We have about 24 hospitals in Florida. So that was under the brand Florida Hospital, but we had different brands within different states. So while we have Florida Hospital within the Orlando, the Tampa, East Coast, we're in North Carolina, we are in Georgia, and it's Gordon, it's Murray, we're in Kansas City, where we're Shawnee Mission. Different websites, different brands, some have hospitals, some don't, and we are positioning and changing to go as a singular brand under one URL, and that was AdventHealth, and it doesn't even include the word hospital in it, which when you looked at a lot of our organic traffic, we got a tremendous amount of traffic just because of having the name Florida Hospital within it. All in all, when we took this over, we had about 800 websites that lived out there, whether they're hospital sites, foundation sites, care center sites, practice sites, and so forth. And it was something that was not maintainable. We were within 35 different CMS platforms. And there was a lot of the content that we looked at a lot of these sites was old, was outdated. A decision about 7 years ago was to purchase the medical library and to put the medical library of terms and information and content on there. That what we saw from both research from consumers and from research from analytics, this was not being successful. So we were making a dramatic change. One URL, one brand. We were changing how we were writing the content, and we were very, very concerned that all of these shifts and all of these changes was going to have a dramatic decrease in how we were found. And
you were worried about, you thought it might be like up to 25% down, right?
Yeah,
I think was one of the numbers you gave me.
We actually went through and we looked at different things, and this really isn't something that normally is done, but we were anticipating that we could foresee in the first year potentially a loss of about 25% organic traffic. And we wanted to prepare the organization, have them ready for it. Had seen and read a lot of different things about how structured data could be leveraged and used, and so we were really looking to find and see if there was a group or organization that could help us in regards to potentially notifying Google prior using structured data, and then also what can we do within the site that we're building to set it up for success to help us with this rebrand. And on top of that, our challenge was we had 35 different content management systems, and so trying to put any kind of structured data through any kind of the code and the development cycles we had was going to be something that we didn't even know how we were going to accomplish. So luckily, was able to find some of the information on Schema App and was able to connect, and we were able to leverage and use that tool. And so we started with actually building out some transition sites and using those transition sites and our legacy sites as an opportunity to inform Google that this name change and this shift was happening. And then as we went ahead and we made the change, we had Schema Markup set up on the new site, and we actually worked on making sure that not only that, but we had a lot of strategy and plans and how we could put the formally name and the references to the old legacy names within there, within set places within the content, so that we could associate those old names, like a Florida hospital Celebration Health is now AdventHealth Celebration, or a Florida hospital Heartland is now actually AdventHealth Sebring. So we had a lot of work that we needed done, but we saw actually a lot of success going forward. It didn't happen just right overnight, but what we thought that we would see at a loss at the beginning was not nearly as much as what we anticipated, and then we actually saw some significant gains as we moved forward. And we, even before that, we actually had some sites before that we actually piloted this on too, and I should have referenced that too. So we've been able to work with the Schema team and to quickly be able to use different templates and structure. And I think the good thing too was we got in at a right time where we could work with our developers to re-architect some of the way content was displayed so that it could be easily tagged and identified to use the tools to build a schema at a rapid pace.
Yeah, absolutely, like total iteration together, right? As we looked at your content and the opportunities and helping you sort of architect in a kind of data architecture in addition to site architecture and how we sort of work with you there.
Right.
Before we jump into, because we're going to go that whole path and explore that.
Sorry,
it's great. I love it. Jeff, do you want to just comment on, like, I think it's really telling sort of on the rebrand side, like before we even got to then, like looking at all the new opportunities and content on the new site as of January last year. Can you just talk a little bit about like what we did on the site to, with schema.org to define like the new name and the old name? Do you want to just kind of take a minute and go through that for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So the challenge was, really well explained by Simon just now. We had multiple different entities under the Adventist Health System or Florida Hospital or CentraCare, all these different names, all these different websites, and everything's being condensed into one brand, one site. So before the switch, early January, we used Schema Markup to prepare the Adventist Health System for this change. So we had transition sites set up, and even before the switch, we established this new name, AdventHealth. So we used schema properties like alternate name, we used the brand using the new name, we used same as to indicate that this thing at a particular URL is the same as this thing on this URL. And we're really trying to get that indexed by Google so the connection is made even before the transition that these two things exist, these two things are the same thing. Then after the rebrand launch, this is after January, we used the schema to explain the new context of the situation. Like now, the legal name is AdventHealth. That old brand, the Adventist Health System, it has a particular dissolution date. It's now no longer. And we use the disambiguating description to explain between the old and new. So for example, if there's places where we say, this is formerly known as the Adventist Health System, and now it's known as this, we can use the disambiguating description to make that difference, all while still using the same as property to tie everything together. One thing I think played a role here outside of any of the like particular properties that we used or any of the health schema markup, which is really cool, is just the power of connected markup. So using @IDs to properly tie things together throughout the AHS website through this web of schema really made it easy. So you can have pages about physicians, services, hospitals. They're all part of this single entity or this one node in your schema markup. And that allowed us to focus on controlling the story here in this one spot for the AHS rebrand, but then it would affect everywhere that it was referenced.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. One of the questions that often come up, Simon, is around like, how do you measure success? So you're like, oh my goodness, like our results were way better. Can you talk about like the tools you use and then, some of the kind of ways that you've been able to quantify the impact, and then we'll go through those details.
And it's interesting too, because I will, one thing too is we had all these different sites that had all their individual GA accounts. And
Yeah.
so it's also very difficult to really measure true success because it's apples and oranges. So every hospital had its own site, and you might have 8 or 9 hospitals within one region, and they all had their own separate URLs, and they had their own traffic. So you could actually differentiate and see all of those. And then as we move forward into this new platform, we now sort of have a situation where we have AdventHealth as a national brand and as a global brand. And so people necessarily aren't just using a hospital site anymore. They could be navigating and using a lot of what we have at the global level to find a physician or find information they need very quickly. So it gets really blended in regards to trying to determine that traffic and how to compare it to the past. The other thing that we did was we dramatically improved through how we wrote the content, how we built the site to reduce the page clutter and the issues that we were seeing from a navigation perspective. So in the past, it might take 8 or 9 pages for someone to find that information. We really pushed and worked on changing the content structure to be able to get that within 2 or 3 clicks every single time. So a lot of the past analytics wasn't necessarily a true indicator or match for that. But we were able to see, you can look at the basic stuff, users, page views, sessions. We pretty much scrapped page views, but we looked at the users, and we looked a lot at what we were seeing from how we were being seen within Google as regards to search impressions and search clicks organically. Martha has taught me a lot about zero-click searches, and I think probably a lot of us on this webinar are probably very familiar, or probably have seen over the past year how much Google has sort of pulled and taken so much content information from other sites and brought it within their own system to sort of retain you within their ecosystem. We use a lot of that stuff to sort of help us understand where we're going and how we're ranking for different keywords and how we're improving within being found within Google. We use SEMrush a lot for a lot of our SEO efforts, and that also allows us to sort of put valuation in what we're seeing from an organic perspective. Search Console has been really, really great. It has a nice, robust section with rich snippets, so you can actually not only see how things are improving and how your site's being found, but you can also see how the rich snippet requests and how those items specifically are being able to impact or affect your search results. You talk about Google algorithms. We had a major traffic uptick literally the day after that, June.
Oh, I have that one. Here we are. Hold on. Ta-da!
Yeah, and actually that line should be moved over to like right where that bump was, but we almost saw a...
Oh yeah, I have it on the wrong spot. Sorry.
We almost had a double overnight in impressions, and it equated to, I think it was almost like a 50% increase in traffic, literally overnight, without making any kind of significant changes during that specific time.
And so you guys have not been affected by a lot of those algorithm changes, right? Like you've seen upticks, whereas a lot of medical companies have seen, down clicks, right?
Right.
Or sort of decreases.
And so we've been focusing on that. We have Site Improve, which is a tool we use to sort of just make sure that we're doing a lot of things right. And then I should mention the Schema App tool, because the Schema App tool is also tracking and telling us which structured data, if there's errors or if there's valid or invalid items in regards to those errors on there too. So I should put that one on there too. I
Yeah, well, we'll
apologize.
add Schema App on the next one, especially with our big analytics focus this year, where we're going to start being able to help companies measure. Do you want to talk a little bit about like how you're valuing search? I thought this was like, it even came up in a customer conversation yesterday on like how you're trying to like match organic traffic to paid search to put a number and dollar value to it. I thought this was interesting.
Yeah, so SEMrush has a algorithm and a tool that it actually looks at what is your organic, like the keywords and what you're actually getting results and clicks and items for impressions. And then based off what it would cost to actually bid to purchase those through paid efforts. And it attributes the value. And we're actually using the low end of their range, because
Amazing.
I always feel like it's better to shoot low and actually exceed those values. So this is actually the low range of what we're actually displaying in here. We've been, really plugging away. I think some of the stuff that has really helped pave the way with doing a lot of focusing more on the structured data. It also allowed us to spend more time focusing on actually our code from a mobile performance perspective, and trying to see what are elements and pieces that we can do to improve how fast and how efficient our pages are performing, so that we can improve that.
So talk to me about, yeah, you can talk to me about this. I just updated the chart to like the top 3 ranked keywords. Like what happened in mobile in December? Like you saw a big jump there.
So we actually, we made some significant changes into some of the efficiencies on our code. And I think that had been some of the conversations that we had in the past as well. So we actually looked at a lot of the scripts and a lot of the tools that we're using, and we tried to see all of those actually necessary. And so we actually stripped down some of the services and features that we weren't using, that we didn't see through analytics, that resulted in actually improving our overall mobile speed of the site. It's still not anywhere nearly where I want it, but it's fantastic. Overall, our traffic, we're about 61% our traffic is mobile. And so I think one of the enlightening things about this is that we're doing a fantastic job on desktop, and yet there's a lot of opportunity for us to improve how we're found on smartphones, on mobile devices, because if we're doing a fantastic job that way. But this has given us a great opportunity to know that there's a lot of ways that we can be more efficient to get found on.
And did you see, when we were talking, you're talking a little bit about like FAQ markup, we think may have helped contribute to that bump in December. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's interesting too. So what I would say, one thing that I've learned is, just because you put the schema markup and you do the markup on your site, it doesn't mean like that day Google's going to get it. And so sometimes it takes time. And so while all of a sudden we saw our FAQ snippet start to get indexed in November, we actually, Jeff, I don't know, we actually put that code, we started putting code on there. I think it was probably it was September or October, I think, where we actually started tagging some of the elements within there. And it just takes some time, just like physician ratings. It took a little bit of time. Physician ratings moved pretty quick, but the ability for it to be found, it did take a little bit of time for Google to identify and see that. I know that we're sending signals to Google to let them know that there is changes within there, but sometimes it does. We've seen just a significant spike within there. I know it doesn't look like that much within here, but to all of a sudden get an additional 1.3 million impressions over just a period of
right? Yeah, awesome.
Which is fantastic. It's really driven us to think and adjust how we're writing content. And so we actually had a whole bunch of service line content that we were rewriting within the beginning of this year, and we actually stopped our writers. And what we are doing now is we are requiring any page that we write that they do create certain questions and answers that can be tied to that content for any new page going forward. And so one of the things that we're working on, and we're going to have it completed at the end of this first quarter is a new FAQ sort of content type within our CMS. And so we'll have the ability to build out a robust library at a global level for our questions and answers, and then to tag and associate them to our services and to our physicians and to our locations. And then we'll embed that as like an accordion FAQ within that page. But we'll also be allowed to then share and use that on other pages that it might be respective content or aligned content within there. And then we're going to embed that within our actual search on our site. So if someone's actually typing a word or doing a search within the search bar, it'll actually not only just bring back page results, but we're going to set it up so it actually just shows them the questions and answers that they have within there. And it's really made us start thinking about how we can even engage a lot of our contact center, our nurse navigators, and others who are getting everyday questions and answers. And what we'd like to do is start to build repositories of that.
So let me get this straight. So you're saying because of like the schema markup work and great results we see in FAQ, you've reprioritized like how you're doing content, and you've also thought about how that goes into your page architecture across the different topics, so that over time you can kind of connect those dots and make sure that like you're ultimately changing the patient experience.
Yes, 100%. And you know,
amazing.
We were talking earlier too, you know, the buzzword, you know, you have people always like, hey, what are we doing for voice search? And, you know, you don't necessarily have to do anything completely different for voice search than what you would be doing to optimize your site in general. But the one thing that stuck to me is that as we become more customized to just asking a question on my phone or asking I'm a Google Home, I'm not an Alexa guy, I'm a Google Home guy. But, you know, you start getting used to asking questions. What we've seen in a lot of our keywords is that, you know, people aren't even just typing long. It used to be like it was keywords and it was long tail keywords. Now people are just typing in questions.
Absolutely.
And so voice search has actually trained people to type search that same way now. And so what better way to do that but to go ahead and do the Q&A and do the questions and write it as though we're answering things specifically for the consumers, and to have a repository that we can just constantly be building to build out the entire database.
Awesome.
You mentioned other things too, recipes. You know, there's always opportunities within your organization that you don't even realize. We have a press. We have a publication company within our organization, and they create educational books. And one of the biggest sellers that they have is heart-healthy recipe cookbooks. And so we're actually repurposing hardbound books. We're purchasing digital books, and we created unique recipe templates that have the ability to put videos and photos and the ingredients. We just got that done, so we're actually building out the first 250, and we're going to see how that potentially can grow and go there. And then one of the biggest things that we see from a keyword perspective is careers, and people are always looking for jobs. And so we've actually been able to partner with our career department to see how we can help them with their job listings, because it's not even, it's one thing to think about what are we doing from a consumer perspective to help drive traffic, to help drive business, but we're also now having additional secondary uses of this that are helping other areas of our organization grow. And so we're starting to work on getting schema markup for our jobs. And then we're going to be doing that as well we started that with our events. And so we're really excited to see how we've seen some significant growth in events, and really looking to see what's going to happen with FAQs over the years.
Amazing. And we've talked about like how analytics is a big focus for us. So we've also like started to, you know, help you be one of our innovators around adding like schema markup into your analytics to, let's say, look at like specialty of other physicians and what drives traffic. And I think that'll be sort of interesting, but we're almost out of time, and I want to get us to Q&A. So maybe like you talked about how like Schema App and, you know, Jeff's expertise as your CSM has helped you like overcome like not having access to developers, about being agile, about getting stuff done. But, you know, I always like to ask, like, what was it like working with us, and like, what was your favorite thing?
You always learn something new. And I think when you're in the trenches and you're busy working, you got lots of projects. So many times you say you're going to be spending time to research and learn, and that always gets set to the side. And like I would say, 100%, like in addition to getting all the structured data set up, it's been the ongoing learning and education that Martha and her team and Jeff have provided that has really helped us use that to help us get more of what we want to achieve done by providing stats, providing education and facts and figures to leadership to help drive them to go the direction that we're doing. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, we love sharing information. And actually, like this webinar is I'll say an example of how we're going to actually try to get really, call it getting nerdy or sharing sort of more of our experience and the experience of our customers as we go into this year. And it's our absolute delight so we have great conversations where it's like, oh, did you see this news? And, before we jump into question and answers, I'm just going to share like news that sort of like got me just like dancing as I sort of went into November and December, because, never before has structured data or schema markup like been sort of one of the top 10 things or 5 things to do as we go into a new year. But in November, out of a Google Webmaster Conference that they did with top SEOs around the world, one of the top things, the first tip they mentioned or trend that they said is that, like implement structured data. So if you don't believe Simon and you don't believe me after this hour, believe Google and Barry Schwartz, as he reports, is like it's important to, stay on top of these changes and implement it on your site. And then, 2 weeks later, Search Engine Journal announced the 10 most important 2020 trends. And I was, grateful to be quoted sort of that, and sort of number 6 being structured data. It's like never been in the top 10. And then those of you that have local businesses, it also, Bright Local sort of said one of their top 20 predictions for 2020 was that, long live schema markup is going to be super important sort of when you do local business search. And so, use schema markup to bolster your success and health. And so with that, we have a couple minutes. Simon, if you're game, and Jeff, we'll jump into some Q&A. So one that's quick, Simon, you mentioned a tool that you use for ratings. Can you repeat that for us?
We aggregate, it's Press Ganey. So we actually ingest all of Press Ganey's position ratings, and then we're actually we're using doctor.com to manage that, but it's something that we're actually built internally.
Okay, and then Jeff, I have one for you. Did you publish the info used in the markup in the on-page content or as well, or did you just publish it in the markup? Do you want to talk to that, Jeff?
Well, the structured data guidelines say that you shouldn't ever include something in your structured data, in your schema markup, unless it's visible to the user of the page. So we strictly took on-page content to inform our schema markup.
Awesome.
And actually, Jeff would tell us we need to get these 3 fields somewhere within the page structure so we can get them marked up. And so we would actually go ahead and do that.
Right.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say it's also a way to help give you ideas on what content to create based off what requirements Google has in their structured data. If there's a required or recommended property and you don't have content for it, it's a good indicator that you should build it.
Totally.
And I would say one other thing too, just to one thing we came across is we have a lot of data that is not in a structured format. So like phone numbers and other addresses, it's really crucial. And even if you're not even using structured data, you should get your addresses and phone numbers aligned with Google's preferred standards and structures so it doesn't error out.
We love that. Yeah, follow the guidelines on sort of like what this, date is a great one, right? Like everyone puts date
but
format.
When you have 3,000 locations and you have different uses of streets and avenues and where you're putting commas and abbreviating cities, it makes it very difficult.
So here's a great one. Simon, how much of a challenge was it to get buy-in from stakeholders around the benefits of schema markup that were not related to producing rich results in the SERP?
So I actually think I lucked out because I've been a big fan of structured data. I think I lucked out in having a rebrand, and I think when we educated and shared the fear of how much we could potentially lose, they were very much more perceptive in hearing what opportunities we could potentially do to offset that. And so I think, not that everyone should have to do that, but I think that was a huge opportunity. The other thing too is is look at what you're paying. If you're doing stuff for paid, pay-per-click or using different things, you can look at maybe what you're using from an SEO perspective, and then look at what that sort of is a percentage of what the value is compared to what you're using. You can potentially be able to show that you're getting a lot more bang for your buck for this, and you're building something that's going to be lasting long. Like this is the long-term play and not just a short-term play, because a lot of what we're doing can also help us reduce potentially what we're spending on paid efforts for a lot of our keywords.
There's a great blog we wrote around 16 ways you can benefit your business with Schema Markup. So if you just Google that, we actually get a nice like featured snippet at the top on it. And then also our case studies, we'll be updating some of our case studies with additional details, hopefully with AdventHealth, but then we also have another one from one of our large clients coming out soon.
The other thing too is voice search is hot right now. And so if you want to tell your organization that you are digitally proofing your site for voice, this structured data is definitely a great opportunity to be able to do that too. So,
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, big believer. I think it's sort of like call it, it's like managing your brand for machines. It's sort of this like data layer that the marketing team has control of and can move very agilely with, which is exactly what we love to do at Schema App. We're out of time. The questions that didn't get answered, we'll actually send you a note directly with those answers so that you'll get it answered. We will have a recording of this as well as a blog written up. So if you want to watch it again or refer back to the slides, you'll get sent that information. Thank you, Simon, so much for joining us today. Thank you, Jeff, for adding in your expertise. And again, my name is Martha Van Berkel. I'm the CEO here at Schema App, and we're absolutely delighted to bring you education and training around Schema Markup for health. Have a great day.